If you've been in public safety for any length of time, eventually you're going to have a difficult conversation with someone. Telling someone that their loved one or their child has died is one of the most emotionally challenging things you will do as an EMT or paramedic. Unfortunately, death notifications are only one of several difficult conversations that we have to have from time to time in our role as EMS professionals. Even as an ER physician who does this on a regular basis, this is still a part of my job that I absolutely dread. Our region's EMS team had the opportunity to chat with an EMS professional who has a passion for teaching others how to have these difficult conversations. Hopefully you find this as helpful as we did. Here's what you need to know.
So we're here with Alex Jabber, who's a paramedic and an educator out in California and has some special interest in teaching paramedics and other EMS professionals on how to have difficult conversations with patients. Death is a reality of our profession, and not just death, but other traumatic situations that we might find ourselves in. So we're very thankful that Alex took some time out of her day to share some of her experience and wisdom with us. So Alex, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background and what you do out in California.
My name is Alex. I work for Riverside County Fire Department in the EMS Bureau, so doing training, education, reviewing calls. I also work at Victor Valley College as an adjunct faculty with their paramedic program, EMT program as well. And I've been in this field since I was 18 years old. I did this right out of high school. Ironically, I picked this profession because I didn't want to go to college. And I thought I could get away from it for a while, and it took me about, let's say 14 years before I got not 14, maybe 12 years before I got my associates, and I didn't really stop after that. I ended up switching my focus from EMS to mental health once I decided to go into my master's program. And the focus that kind of appealed to me most was in grief and bereavement. So we learned a lot about death, grief, how people process death, what makes the grieving process more difficult and whatnot, and as well as like trauma and PTSD and suicide. So those are two of my big focuses right now, and will continue to be so because I'm continuing with my PhD in psychology.
So I don't know if you're interested in sharing it all, but was there anything specific that got you interested in this specific field of psychology and medicine?
You know, I was trying to think back to that actually, but I don't know what the biggest reason was. It was kind of accumulation of events, but honestly, I really disliked my bachelor's degree, and I thought if I'm going to go for my master's, I'm going to pick something interesting. And I had a back injury around that time as well, so knowing that my time potentially in the field was going to be limited, I wanted to give myself an opportunity to do something that was still relative to our field, but kind of sidelined that direct patient care. So what was something we were lacking? What was something that we lacked every time we put a new academy out into the field? And there's only so much time to go over all the curriculum that's mandated by the state and by the national standard. And there's so much that we overlook. And one of the things was, how do we let people die? We teach our students and our paramedics who are out in the field how to intervene death, but we don't tell them how to support the family once there's nothing more we can do for the patient. And there's been absolutely no training in that, nothing formal anyways. And I saw an opportunity to kind of bridge that gap. So that's what kind of led me to that. Simultaneously, the rise of suicide in our field went up. And a former medic I worked with had died this way. And it was really interesting to me to find that program I picked kind of tied into both of those topics. And so that's where I'm going with it. It's, hey, maybe there's not time in a paramedic program to teach about these things within the few weeks that we have them, because really it's not that long. It feels forever when you're in school, but it's really not that long at all. I thought, okay, well, how about I just start teaching the stuff I want to teach, the stuff that we're craving for, we want more training in. So that's kind of what drove me where I'm at right now.
That's interesting. The last few months in this video update that we produce, we've focused a little bit or a lot on responder mental health and suicide awareness. It tends to be in the spring. April is our highest month for suicide calls, at least in our area, but it's year-round. You know, it's a cumulative effect of stress and trauma. So that's really kind of timely that we're able to talk to you this month to piggyback on some of the work that we've done in the past. Because I think those experiences, we think of trauma, you know, the gory situations, the traumatic deaths, the kids, you know, that we deal with that are victims of unfortunate situations. Those add up over time, over a lifetime of working in public safety. But it's also those conversations and some of those emotionally traumatic experiences where you have to explain to a family that, you know, mom is dead, or their child, you know, there's nothing more that we can do for their child. That adds up too. So what, you mentioned the suicide and some of the other things. What have you seen in your area with regards to PTSD in public safety and responders and the impact that that's had on the profession?
It's really hit or miss as far as what group a certain person might belong to, as far as whether they believe it's something that's an issue with first responders, or they believe this isn't an issue and why all of a sudden is this a thing. And I think the reason why is because suicide was very easily hidden. It was shamed, it was hidden, it's not something you talked about. It was something that hasn't been kind of brought into the light until it was forced to be brought into the light. The death of my former medic was so public, there was no hiding it. And it was the most unfortunate situation, of course, but because of how it happened, it really started some traction on this topic because, you know, the department really leaned into it. They talked about it, they talked openly about it. And people who thought, wow, this wasn't a problem, and even myself, I knew it was a problem, but I didn't realize how bad of a problem it was until it happens to someone you would never expected it to happen to. And so, unfortunately, you can't convince everybody that this is an issue that needs attention, and that's not my goal. Unfortunately, what I've seen is people who thought it was bogus and thought this is a thing for just veterans, military veterans. It takes it happening to someone they know before they go, oh, this actually is a problem. So we're kind of in that transition phase right now with coming to awareness with it, and then also realizing it's still very under, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not completely understood, and there isn't a huge public awareness outside of our field, I believe.
Sure. So let's go back to some of those difficult conversations. And when you talk about this, when you present on this topic, what are the tips or the things that you like to bring up that might help some of our responders next time they have to deal with this?
Well, one of the things I like to start off with is, you know, our field is not a mathematical equation. We can do every single thing right, and the patient still dies. And I think when we have to have that conversation with a family member, that really is associated with that feeling of failure, whether we realize it's happening or not. And so reminding at not only the student level, but the provider level that's already out there functioning in the field, but telling them that, you know, it's completely okay to have this conversation with the family. This is what you're gonna expect when you have the conversation with the family. Always tell the truth is a big part. Always tell the truth. Be comfortable using the word dead and died. People want to tiptoe around that word when in these situations, and I default to it as well. I'm not saying it's not easy to say your mother is dead, but when you're speaking to someone who is in that state of panic and stress, they're not going to process, they're not going to make it, or they're no longer with us. They're not going to process the euphemisms that we use for death. So telling the truth, being comfortable with those words, understanding that the family's response is not always going to be pleasant. Sometimes they're going to get angry with us, and there's always that fear of, what about our safety? And of course, if the scene is no longer safe, then that trumps everything. But more often than not, we have to remember they're scared. They just received some terrible news, and the way the brain works, when they trigger that fight or flight, they're wanting to find someone to blame it. Sometimes that is us. So by communicating with them immediately, I think is one of the most important things. So for example, we get on scene, work with full arrest. There's a pretty good chance this person's not going to make it, especially with history will show. And we're starting to get some better improvements with getting Ross and getting patients back. But there's no denying the fact that this is still a very significant event in that person's life, right? So we should be going straight to whoever is the company officer or the captain on scene, who doesn't have hands on the patient directly, can speak to the first point of contact with the family and tell them right up front, this does not look good. This is what's happening. They're clinically dead right now. This is what we're doing to try and reverse it. If this doesn't work, this is what we're going to do. And start telling them, some of our agencies around here are staying on scene 20 and 30 minutes with a full arrest. Not all of them, but some of them. And why wait until minute 17, 18, 19 to start breaking that news? Start at minute 1 and keep them involved in the process and letting them know what's happening. And it actually makes it a little easier on us as well, because we're doing microdoses of this thing. And, I think that all that aside, sometimes saying nothing at all is just as effective. We do not have to fill the space. We do not have to fill the silence with excess words. That's when I tend to shove my foot in my mouth and say something I wasn't supposed to. So, sometimes silence is completely okay.
So this is something as an ER physician too that I have to deal with, and this was hard. During residency, we get a little bit of experience doing this, but like you said, it's kind of a topic that we tiptoe around a little bit, and I don't think we do a very good job of preparing people for this. So you mentioned using the word dead or died. I completely agree 100% with that. How do you advise people to do that? You don't just want to walk up to the family member and say, I'm sorry, but Jimmy is dead. But you also don't want to say, hi, how are you, or to have these pleasant chit-chat conversations to lead into it. Do you just break it, or what have you found is useful in easing into those, if there is a way to ease into them?
So ultimately, we know what the point is that we're trying to make. So you build up to it. So you say, I understand that your husband has been, terminally ill. I understand this. I understand that you haven't seen him since last night. This is what we're finding. We see this discoloration here. We call that lividity. We see X, Y, and Z. So maybe you kind of start finding little pieces, microdoses to explain to them, because at the point that you do say dead, it's final and they will not process anything you say afterwards.
Yeah.
So being sure to get your point across, the points that you really want them to hear before you finalize and say, this is it. We're done here. So.
And that's what I found too. Is it's helpful to come in and just say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Peterson. I'm the one caring for whoever this might be, your family member," and then just do a very brief summary, but not use too many technical words. Just keep. I understand that when we got here, Bob was on the floor. He didn't have a pulse. He wasn't breathing. We've done everything that we can do, and unfortunately, we weren't able to get a pulse back. So I'm sorry to say that Bob has died, and there's nothing more that we're able to do. So something like that, just to briefly summarize the situation before you kind of get into it and set them up for it.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that I forgot is definitely introduce yourself and know that person's name, know the patient's name, know the person you're speaking to, their name as well, so that it's not just, oh, I know this is your mother or family member. It's not generic. It becomes more personal. And when you use their name, it develops that rapport and maybe that trust. And I think that really reinforces the scene safety when we're in an uncontrolled environment out in the field. Another thing I wanted to bring up was, what was it? You said something that triggered my memory. I'll come back to it, but I would say that definitely introducing yourself to them and keeping it as personal as possible, because this is one of the most significant days in their life, and we're given the honor to be a part of it.
So you also mentioned how sometimes we need space. You break the news, and we shouldn't feel like we have to fill the silence with words of encouragement or anything like that. I usually just kind of end it with I'm so sorry that this happened today, or I'm so sorry for your loss, and then I just let them process. And sometimes they have questions, and sometimes they wail, sometimes, like you said, they get angry, and sometimes they're just in shock, and they just sit there, and they don't know what to do. And I think that's difficult for us too, because like you said, we're used to intervening. We come on a situation, we intervene, and same with conversations. There's dead space in a conversation, we want to intervene, but Can you talk a little bit more about the value of just being there and just listening and just letting them process a little bit, and how we can effectively accomplish that?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, because we want to fix it. So if they're wailing, crying, if they are having a breakdown, we want to naturally kind of innately soothe them, but understanding and respecting that that is part of their grieving process. And it has been very well documented and studied that different cultures are going to grieve and react very differently. And so I think that giving them the space to do that is really important, being patient with them. Words of encouragement, not really necessary here, but we've all kind of done that just on autopilot and said something that we know wouldn't make it better, but it's just what we thought we were supposed to say, like, they're in a better place, they didn't, this and that. If the patient asks, did they suffer? I always say no. Because there's no way to say that answer is for the patient's family, not for the patient, right? And I think the only thing I really try and stress right now, especially with us getting more savvy with the hands-only CPR prior to arrival, so where dispatchers are actually instructing on CPR, is I don't care how terrible their CPR was when you got there, tell them thank you for doing that, because that was a huge step. It doesn't matter. I mean, every time we get called out for something, somebody was on the other line. And still, there's a large percentage of them who are not putting their hands on the chest because they're too afraid to, right? So, letting them know that you did a great job, because if we kind of try and tell them that, hey, you're not supposed to be down on the stomach, and then the person dies, what do they associate with the reason that that person died?
Right.
Perhaps. So, and then the questions, like you said, the questions are a big thing. And sometimes the questions will come later. And I think that a lot of times we think the next person is the one that's most trained to talk to the family. And in reality, I don't know about how much training you got in med school, but I didn't get any training in this. I think there was a small conversation about it in med school. And really the two professions that get the most training on delivering news are chaplains and social workers. And then if you work in a hospital that has child love specialists, those are the only ones. So how many hands did these family members have to pass through before someone was able to sit down with them and have a talk about their family member's death? We are, between ourselves on scene and yourselves in the hospital in the ER, where the patient gets pronounced in one place or another, we are the most valuable piece of grief for that family, because we're able to answer as much. And sometimes we can't answer the questions, and that's okay too. But that does add to the healing process for the family.
Sure. So another thing related to that is that death doesn't discriminate culture, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. Different people with different backgrounds have different ways of coping with emotional trauma and difficult situations like this. What advice do you have for dealing with difficult conversations with people of a different ethnicity that may have a way of coping with that is not comfortable to me or is not familiar to me?
Sure. And that's bound to happen, and I've seen it plenty of times. I think that the word cultural competency tends to be it's a very big word right now in this industry. But when you stop and really think about it, what is cultural competency? What do you think of when you think cultural competency? And my impression is that I need to be able to relate to every single culture. And when you stop and think of the fact that we've got 6 billion people in this world, and culture can be defined by so many different things. You've got culture based on your ethnicity, culture based on the country you were raised on, culture based on language, religion, you name it. So it's really such a moving target. And then you think about it, you could have one fire department that does the same exact thing as this fire department does, and their cultures are completely different. So why are we trying to be culturally competent with all of them, and instead ask ourselves, what do all these cultures have in common? And you narrow it down to a couple of things that are really so simple. It's, why didn't we think of that before? And I got this idea from the late author George Thompson, who wrote a book on, he called it verbal judo. So basically he was a cop in the streets and didn't want to fight all these people because he was really skilled in martial arts. And so he learned how to communicate with them, how to de-escalate every situation he was in. He wrote a book about it and wound up teaching quite a few people. And one of the best things I learned from him was that everybody wants to be treated with respect. Everybody wants to be treated with dignity. Everybody wants us to ask them to do something versus order them to do something, and to take the time to explain to them why. So I think that when we keep those 4 things in mind, that it's not that every single culture across the board, every single human on earth across the board wants to be treated with respect and dignity, you'll be culturally competent every time.
So what if I find myself in a situation like this and I just don't know what to say? What advice, are there any mental reminders or things that I can use to prompt myself when I just don't know what to say?
I'd say that after the introductions have been made, the rapport has been made, maybe you've respected the silence that has naturally occurred, but now they're asking questions and you don't know how to answer them. I would say one of the best ways to approach that is to ask them what they understand. And this goes back to, especially when dealing with children. So let's say you have to answer to a child about what they understand about their parents' death. And so you start by asking, what do you understand so far? And then you kind of get an idea of where you need to fill the gaps. Because if you're just talking about something they already get, it might lose their focus and train of thought because they've got a million things running through their head. So kind of start by asking questions. You can never go wrong by asking questions to see where they're at versus, and that's what communication is. I think that communication is so much less about what we're saying and more about what we're asking. And so I would say definitely say those things. And then some things not to say are, don't sugarcoat it. Don't say, they're in a better place. Don't say calm down. Do not say calm down, because that's the last thing that'll happen. There's a few other things that aren't coming to mind right now, but those are the basics. Those are the big ones.
Are there any online resources or books that you recommend if we have providers who are interested in digging into this a little bit more?
The only things that I've come across are my textbooks from school. There's a lot of supplemental books that I kind of read along the way, and I would say that Verbal Judo was one of them that really kind of helped me with communication. And granted, he's talking from a law enforcement perspective, but he was also a professor at a college. He also understands a couple different ways of, it just comes down to communication. And if you dive into more material about communication, that would definitely lead you in the right direction. However, when it comes specifically to EMS and let's say the ERs, talking to the family members, I don't know. Maybe that's something that needs to be created.
After we've had these conversations and it leaves a little bit of emotional scar on ourselves, what advice do you have for people after the call for processing these kinds of situations?
I think the best way is to mindfully discharge it. And what I mean by that is some people relieve their stress by doing a workout. Some people relieve their stress by playing with their kids. Some people relieve their stress by going and doing something that is a hobby of theirs. So maybe they work, do wood crafting, or maybe they do, I don't know, something that kind of brings them some sort of joy, I guess is the best way to put it. And, sometimes it's talking to people. Sometimes it's not, though. Oftentimes it's not this conversation that happens with people. But what I mean by mindfully discharging it is if it is something that bothers you and you don't make a point to say, I had a really rough shift, I'm going to go do this before I go home, or no, I'm not going to pick up this overtime because I want to go play with my kids right now and kind of process exactly what I experienced, then it comes out in anger. It gets discharged in anger, and it gets discharged in ways that end up hurting the people around us. And so there's a whole lot of self-awareness that has to occur with that. And then on the other hand, reminding our providers that if it doesn't bother you, that's okay too. You're not an evil person. There's plenty of calls I've been on where I went straight back to eating my food afterwards and had no problems with it. But there's the calls that haven't. And there's those certain people in my life that I know I can say, hey, let's grab a beer. I had a bad shift. And talk about it, and they go, I made that mistake too. I had this happen too. And you share those experiences and you're like, okay, I'm not so weird. And I think that's really what it is sometimes it's not going to bother us. But again, the call that does bother us is usually a cumulative effect of other things, not just within our work,
Sure.
but also with home too.
Sure. Is there anything else, any other advice, any other thoughts that you have about this that we can share?
I'd say if this resonates with anybody, this topic resonates with anybody, start asking your agencies to put on more training for it. I don't know that it exactly exists yet. There's got to be somebody within each agency that is in charge of training that can do their homework on it and present it in person, not online. This is not a topic that needs to be presented online, which is really very easy training. I'm sure you're familiar with the various different portals that we have to do this stuff online. This is not busy work. This is a really big deal to talk about. And I think in turn, by teaching our providers how to talk to the families about death, we're in turn going to be better patient advocates, because the difference between patient care and patient advocacy is that patient care ends with the patient, patient advocacy extends to the family. It will also help to make us feel more prepared, because when a kid dies and we didn't know what to say because we weren't prepared, we might process that a little differently than if we knew what we were doing going into it.
Sure. And I think this piggybacks onto another topic that we call compassion fatigue that we're going to talk about in a future update. But just how do you process all of this so that you're ready for the next patient and you can provide that same high level of care, compassion, advocacy, empathy, whatever you need to do on the next call. It's like you said, you might turn around, you might not even get out of the truck back at the station, and the tones go off again and you're out the door again. And you need to be just as ready for that call as you did for the call before. So it's very important to have a plan, I think, a mental plan for, like you said, how are you going to mentally discharge this experience so that you're ready for the next one?
Yeah, and I think self-care is a very underappreciated concept. And I think, especially being in healthcare and especially being in the emergency medical field, we want to take care of everybody else. And because of the rules that we play in this field, we have a tendency to take care of the people in our family and around us as well, right? We're the ones they call when they have a crisis. So we're constantly putting out fires. We're constantly mitigating, crisis and fixing everybody else, but we're also constantly neglecting us, ourselves. And when we do that, it completely shows up in our work. And I will be the first to say I'm learning. Sure. We'll put it that way.
Could you expand a little bit on some of the things not to say? You mentioned, calm down and they're in a better place, but anything specific that just come to mind, things that we should not be saying in these situations?
Some of the things not to say. So we talked about using plain English with them, not sugarcoating or using euphemisms to say that their family member is no longer with us or they passed on. So another one is don't say I understand how you feel, because every situation is unique and there's no way for us to understand how they feel. There's a difference between trying to relate to someone in their experience and be empathetic and say, hey, this happened to me when my mom died. I understand how hard, this was really hard for me, so I can't imagine what it must feel like for you because you're younger or whatever it might be, but be very delicate with that approach. And most of the times it's not necessary. Trying to justify the situation by they're in a better place, they lived a long life, clearly they lived a very happy life, they've had grandkids, at least. Oh, that was the other one too. Do not say at least. So at least is another way of kind of justifying it. And there's another author, Brené Brown, is a researcher, and she researches empathy, and among a few other things. And she had the best description or the best way to explain the difference between empathy and sympathy. And she says, empathy rarely starts with at least. At least, fill in the blank. At least they died quickly. At least you still have your father. At least whatever. And we can translate that in all aspects of our life, not just with our patients' family members. Another one would be strong. No, it's okay to break down. It's okay to feel weak. It's okay to lose it and feel very emotional over something like this.
Sure. Well, Alex, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today, and for taking the time out of your busy schedule, I'm sure, to share some of this with us. If anyone has any desire to learn more about this topic or dig a little bit deeper into this, feel free to reach out to our EMS education department, and we'll be happy to look into this and help you out as much as we can.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.